I would like to add that it's not just students that you need to be mindful of, it's also staff members. And so for us in South Kingstown, our journey started more than 2 years ago when our special education director, Teresa Egan, took a tour of every building and every site with our athletic director and our maintenance director, just to talk out what our flexibility was in terms of restroom use and in terms of locker room use and in terms of unisex stalls. And so to make sure that we have privacy for all, one of the things we uncovered is there are not a lot of the privacy screens. And so we increased lots of privacy screens, which we got feedback from especially middle school students that was well overdue. So, they were pretty happy to have that. They explained that they used to rush from class to get to the, little areas that did have a more private screen. So most children would like to be private, and that's something to notice. Then Teresa worked very hard with our administrators and developed administrative procedures, simply walking principals and other administrators through protocols and developing protocols along with Sarah for what to do if a parent or a child, and it's usually a child that comes forward, or staff member expresses a need for help with bullying and harassment because of their gender identity, or has names or pronoun requests to change their student records, requests a change of facilities. We have overnight field trips, requests change for, to room with an alternate group of young men or young women, and requests in physical education, intramural sports, and athletics. And so that was a big focus in the beginning. It was more not necessarily moving into the policy realm, but talking about protocols, because you all have students who are either transitioning now or who have transitioned, and they are as young as preschool, kindergarten, and first grade, I promise you. And so not all are as comfortable sharing, but they will. And so you need to be ready, and you need to make sure that your principals are ready and don't make a very fatal mistake by confronting a very young child and sort of putting off what that child knows to be true, in making sure that the first avenue that they seek is not a sort of a closed avenue for them. And then last summer, we had significant professional development by a local group, Youth Pride in Rhode Island. I highly recommend, if you're looking for professional development, this organization has been extremely helpful to us. We have a full-day administrative retreat, or 2 full days, depending upon the season and what's in front of us. And Youth Pride came in and gave dramatic professional development to our administrators, and they learned so very much. And then we have a school committee retreat, and Youth Pride came in and worked with our school committee members. Then we had Youth Pride has gone to individual schools and worked with faculty, and in some cases worked with parents, depending upon the request. In the fall, we had a community conversation, and this was one of those, like, cross your fingers and hope that no one terrible comes and says something awful that will absolutely, tear apart the heart of a young child who is presenting. And it was lovely. It was very inclusive. It was wonderful. You would, if you were there, you would have cried. It was a tremendous evening. Our assistant superintendent, Pauline Lisi, is in charge of our community conversations, and she set up different tables. Sarah and Joe were at one table when people, rotated through the experts to find out if they had any questions legally, if they wanted, to ask, what the status was in terms of what the Obama administration was saying versus what the Rhode Island Department of Education was saying. Then we had Youth Pride as a group, and they actually kicked off with a very similar presentation in terms of all of the different acronyms and pronouns and identity terms. That was really, really super helpful, I think, for our full audience to hear. And then we had the University of Rhode Island, who is a partner in our work. They're in South Kingstown, and they're wonderful. And they went through a major transformation of their entire school community. And so we had the professors and folks that were running that program. My 4 children all attended URI, and the difference between my daughter's experience in terms of a very inclusive and open and supportive campus to now my youngest son in 6 years is really mind-boggling. It's terrific. So they are a model as well, and I highly recommend their support. And then our fourth group was our LBGTQ group from the high school. And that was the most powerful group, to be honest with you. Hearing from our students with support of their parents is what really changed, I think, everything for our community. And so in February, we adopted a policy. And from my perspective, my advice is front load with training. Listen to your students, be as open-minded, inclusive, and respectful as possible, and we have had no issues. Everybody seems to be very supportive and welcoming and happy, and I'm very proud of them all.
I just want to speak briefly as to Cumberland's experience from a school committee point of view. We started down the path of a transgender policy because our middle school administrative team and some teachers came to us and said, we have an issue. We have students that are going through this, and we need to have some direction on how to handle it. So our Director of Special Education, Dr. Rachel Santa, she did all the nuts and bolts work of putting all information together. The school committee has a policy subcommittee, which I'm the chair. And we went through that process pretty openly. We made it very clear that we were going to start our conversation so that people from the public could be aware of it. We invited the local newspapers to be a part of that conversation so that there was always going to be community knowledge going forward so that nobody could be surprised by it. We had teachers come in and speak to us what their experiences were. We had students from student government come and speak to us. We also, we had a student a couple of years ago that was actually bullied right out of our high school because they were gender nonconforming. They ended up finding a placement at Beacon, which was much more welcoming to them, and they've succeeded since then. But that student was wanting very much to be a part of our conversation, and he had a lot of great input, as well as his mother from a parent point of view. So when we had our conversation, I mean, quite honestly, being the policy chair, very fortunate that I work with a group of people that are very progressive. Although we disagree on a lot of things, we do believe that protection of students is always the #1 issue. For a lot of our locker room and bathroom discussions, we kind of deferred to the Interscholastic League on athletics because they already have a lot of guidelines out there. And RIDE was just coming out with their guidelines when we started our conversation. The Obama administration had not actually put their letter out when we had first started our conversation. But what we try to do is we try to become as knowledgeable about this as we possibly could. There's some good information in the packets that Tim and Judy have put together, and there's so much more on the internet. Somebody like Dusty, who has gone through this, there are so many interviews with celebrities and people in the public eye that have also gone through this and they relate their experience, and you realize how early in life these choices, not choices, but these not decisions, what's the word I'm looking for?
Identities.
Thank you. Identity recognition is happening for people. You know, as young as 6 years old, Dusty, you said 2 to 3 years old. So, I mean, that's a lot of concern that parents always have is, these kids are too young. No, they're not. These kids know. And as school administrators and school policymakers, we have a responsibility, first and foremost, for the protection of our students, whether it's from bullying, for whatever reason. And actually, Cumberland took it from a different kind of angle. We created our policy on just transgender, what their rights are, what their ability for school records, bathroom usage, all that sort of stuff. And we made the same accommodations for gender conforming students who were not comfortable using the bathrooms anymore. So we made our policy very generic in a way, so that it was kind of open to everyone. Our dress policy is where we addressed how kids could dress. The ACLU actually, they loved our transgender policy. They did not like the fact that we did not have any mention of the dress policy. But we did that in our dress policy. We made that very generic. We made our bully policy very generic. It doesn't matter why you're being bullied, it's got to stop. It doesn't matter if a boy or a girl wants to wear a dress or a halter top, it still has to conform to the same standard. So that's how we kind of went about it. I'm going to be very interested in actually, we're going to be reviewing our transgender policy because it has been a full year almost, full school year that it's been in place, and we want to double check with students and faculty to see how it's been working, which again, policy is a very living entity and it's got to be reviewed to see how it's working. These things always come up. And I'll be very interested in having North Kingston's policy, South Kingston, sorry. Then you got West Kingston and, you know, but.
We have a West Kingston.
Yeah, that's not even a real place. So it's like South County, not a real place. I'm sure. So that's okay. In Cumberland, everybody still refers to what village they live in. So, so and you know, the biggest concern was always about the public's view on what was going to happen. I know when Westerly attempted to do it, they had and Cherahoe, huge backlash. We kind of, because I think we reached out more, we did have a religious leader come and wanted to have that discussion. I know our superintendent, Bob Mitchell, had a conversation with him. I sat down with him and kind of explained why we were doing it and my belief that that policy was going to be passed no matter what the reaction of the public was going to be. Because quite honestly, we're a representative form of government. We are not a democracy. It is up to us to be learned about the decisions that we're making and to make the right decision, regardless of the slings and arrows. And that cut off a lot of, when we had our transgender policy talk, we had people coming out to speak in favor of it. We had students thanking us because they felt like they were finally being accepted by their schools and protected by their schools. The only statistic we ever need to look at is the 40% of transgender kids that try to commit suicide, And that should be the deciding factor in what we do. We have to protect kids. And I think we've done that. And we all need to do it. Every school committee should have a policy in place, I think, very soon, so that before any of these issues come up, before a kid attempts suicide, we need to make sure that these kids are accepted and welcomed by their school committees, by their school districts, their teachers, their faculty, everyone. And as Kristen said, a huge part of it is professional development. And there's a lot of little things that the different alliances out there have for suggestions, as far as like teachers wearing certain colored lanyards so that kids that are going through a gender identity crisis or whatever you want to, what would I have? Gender identity crisis? Transition. You know, kids, because a lot of kids are still trying to figure it out. They know that these are the adults that they can go to and that they can be welcomed by that adult and be helped to make some decisions and maybe some guidance and maybe be in touch with other groups. That was very important to some of the students we had talked to. And quite honestly, I had some teachers and even past school committee people say to me, I don't get it. I don't get the whole transgender thing. Is this a real thing? And you know what? It doesn't matter if we get it. We just have to pass a policy, quite honestly, to protect the kids. And that's all it really comes down to for me.